Microdosing is the new trend, but where does it fit into the mushroom revolution? Well, for context, mushrooms have not only been used for food,
I love mushrooms, they're so good,
but have been used for their psychoactive properties for thousands of years.
This mushroom is the fly agaric. It's considered the oldest intoxicant in the world and famously used by shamanic tribes of the far north. And while it's hard to tell given the variability of caps, not even that much, prepared properly, could send you on a journey. In other words, read that as not a beginner mushroom. This mushroom is a psilocybin-containing mushroom. This is a psilocybe mushroom, otherwise known as a magic mushroom. It was known to be used in indigenous ceremonies in Mexico and likely all over the world. About this much of this mushroom is considered a heroic dose. That's 5 grams. That will essentially take you to a different reality for a few hours. Researchers at Johns Hopkins used an equivalent dose of the synthesized active ingredient in these mushrooms, psilocybin, and found that there was a decrease in depression and anxiety after a single session of psilocybin.
Studies like those and others across the world are highlighting a new use for psilocybin.
But what if instead of taking a high dose of these mushrooms, which could require some assistance, instead you took a very small dose? That is microdosing. But first, let me summarize what we know so far. Microdosing was first coined by this guy, Dr. James Fadiman, now known as the father of microdosing. Microdosing is about 5 to 10% of a regular dose taken intermittently for the intent of improving your life. Often people will take it 2 to 4 times a week for a few weeks to several months. The question is, how can it have all of these positive effects? Well, they came up with a few ideas. First, it could be a placebo, which doesn't mean it's not nothing. It's really a way of stating that the body has a natural ability to heal if incentivized properly. Another option is that it could be systemic, much like, say, a vitamin. Now, you don't just take a vitamin and on the first day you notice a difference, like vitamin C or iron, for instance. But if taken over time, it helps the whole body function better. They also hypothesized that maybe it's having something to do with the mitochondria, which are the fuel source of your entire system, and they degrade over time. Maybe that has something to do with it. And a final explanation may have to do somehow with neuroplasticity, in other words, increasing the brain's ability to adapt and change to new situations. That seems to be an interesting explanation given that we know higher doses definitely increase neuroplasticity. Regardless of how it works though, people are using it to treat all of those ailments. And then in addition, there are unintended improvements that they found. What I mean by that is that afterwards people reported eating healthier, working out more, and then also decreased drug uses of all sorts of different things. Not only just the hard things that you would think about as bad, like opiates and maybe tobacco, but also alcohol, caffeine. That, to me, is really, really interesting. Where we're at the moment is we've got this preliminary data that the science is telling us seems to be effective for, and then we're trying to allow people to use it properly in their lives. And that's where microdosing coaches come in, or health and wellness coaches. They're essentially working with each individual person and trying to make sure their dose is not too low or too high, much like how a guide would help you on a large dose. And I got one on the phone recently and asked him what his thoughts were on the whole process.
When you're experiencing the benefits with really like minimal to no effects, that's kind of what the sweet spot of where microdosing is. Think about like the most amazing day you've had. Just a normal average day where you just felt so damn good. And that's what microdosing helps you do more often. It helps you to feel like yourself, your best version of yourself, because you're able to be more present with your day. The more present you are, the happier you are, because you can't experience happiness in the past or the future. It's only something that you could experience here and now.
I should note we are trying to do more research on is this effective or is it not. One of the more recent studies seemed to indicate that there was no effect of microdosing. And the one problem with that study is that they used mostly healthy individuals to determine if microdosing was even effective. In other words, if you don't already have a problem, you're not going to see a lot of improvement. And that could be a big problem that we see in the literature and something that we have to address moving forward. I also took a trip to see Irene Dubin, who is a psychedelic psychotherapist who uses mushrooms in her work to help people heal, to ask her what her clients report on microdosing.
My clients reported to me as well that the psilocybin helped them feeling better, just mood-wise, or with a chronic pain. Again, it might be anti-inflammatory factors in psilocybin. The proper microdose doesn't gonna give you any sense in the body. It has to be sub-perceptional. But over time, 1 or 2 weeks later, you may start feeling better.
Of course, Trad, who also runs the retreat, seems to indicate that maybe a macrodose really is the way to go.
I recommend the macrodose. The microdose might numb it down for that day. And the beauty of psilocybin and a macrodose is to really get down and dig out that root, like what's rooting around in there. Let's dig it up, get a look at it, and let's see how we can fix it.
I tend to agree with Trad, but I know that for a lot of people, setting aside the time to do a full journey is difficult, it's scary. But if you just had a small amount in powdered form and you could take in the morning and see how your body reacted to it, that would be easier for some people. So what did I find?
Seems like a silly thing, but it's a huge thing. Found ways to organize that I haven't been able to for like over a year.
I found it on days that I microdosed, I did feel better. I thought everything looked prettier, especially outside. It allowed me to do medial tasks a lot easier. So say I was out weeding in the yard. Things that would drive me crazy before because it just was time consuming. Basically anything that I do outside, which is a little bit monotonous, was quite enjoyable. And so there is a time and place for that, and I have a lot of those things I have to put into my life. I generally have a little, it's not even an anxiety, it's just like an impatience trying to get all of these things done. I will say the one downside that I found was that on days that I microdosed, especially if I took just a little bit too much, then I started to feel something. So it wasn't like maybe nothing. Maybe that's where I need a microdose coach. But I did find that I do a lot of complex problem solving, and I could tell that there was a slight decrease in my cognitive ability. Not much. Much like if you had half a glass of alcohol, you wouldn't say that it decreased your ability to have social interactions. In fact, it would actually increase your ability to have social interactions. But you definitely would be a little bit wary of, are you going to get behind a wheel? Are you going to do anything that could require all of your brain power? Because even if you don't notice, you know that it's slightly decreased. Now, I noticed it. In the end, it did help me decrease negative chatter in my head. So that's, I think, why it helps different people differently. I don't think I need it on a long-term basis or even short-term anymore. I got what I needed out of it, and I can go from there. So you'll have to decide for yourself what your opinions are. If you have experienced microdosing, leave your comments down below. If you're trying to figure out how am I going to get into this, stay tuned till the very end because I have the best resources. You're not going to find them in the comments generally because bots, you never can trust them. In addition, I fully recommend this book by Dr. Fadiman, which is probably the Bible for this sort of thing.